Welcome back to Between Two Racks with the Kilo Crew. On today's episode, we're going to discuss body composition training. So, let's kick it. When I posted in our stories the other day about topics and questions, they're all over the place, but one that kept coming up was fat loss, hypertrophy, strength training, so body composition training. So on today's episode, I just kind of want to have a open-ended discussion. It'll go wherever it takes us on body composition training. And to get us started, I was thinking we can all kind of explain our personal view on what body composition training is to us. For me personally, when I think back 12 years ago, when I first started working at Poliquin Group, body composition training, when I heard that, I really only ever thought it was fat loss training. Like I only associated it to losing fat. And I think that's a lot of people in our industry when they think of working with personal training clients, when it's body composition goals, they only think it's fat loss driven goals. And personally for me, I know that's changed over the years. It might have been because I hit my fat loss goal. So then my goals shifted away from, okay, I'm not constantly trying to just drive fat loss. Now I'm driving hypertrophy. I still want to drive my strength. So it's changed for me. I don't know, Porik, what about you?
Well, just as a general, like body comp training is any training that your overarching goal is a change in body comp, whether it be a reduction in fat or increase in muscle mass. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean that is the extent of the training. You can still have body comp training goals while training for strength or while training other facets. But yeah, it's pretty much any training that's going to be somewhat dedicated to trying to change your physique.
Yeah. Alex?
I remember when I first started competing, because I would never weight train before I started competing, like way back. And I always thought, well, you just need to get same thing. We just need to lose fat.
Yeah.
And then I think that's where it really started to switch for me, where I'm like, okay, you're trying to lose fat, but you're also, trying to maintain or gain muscle. And then people would always be surprised when they're like, because when you're muscular, they think you're so big, but when they actually see you, you're smaller. And so it's both, definitely.
Yeah. I know we were just talking about it the other day because a dear friend of ours was talking about how she wants to lean bulk, but it's two different. You can't. Can you do both at one time?
You can't. No, because bulk implies that you're putting on, and then lean implies that you're taking off. Yeah. But you can definitely get leaner, and then
that's what I'm doing.
Muscle at the same time.
Right now, I'm doing that. I'm getting leaner little by little, but I'm putting on muscle every week.
Yeah.
Steph?
Me, first of all, I'm blown away that people ask for hypertrophy, and we just did an entire hour on hypertrophy. I mean, yeah, body comp is like Porik said, like positive changes in muscle mass and positive changes in fat mass. So if you reduce body fat and increase lean tissue or muscle tissue, you have an improvement in body composition, and that can be done with different modality. But of course, training being a very important thing, the only way you can truly optimize body composition is with the addition of proper nutrition as well. So to put on muscle and lose fat at the same time, it's definitely doable. It's more doable or easier to accomplish with a full-blown novice. A little harder to do when you have higher training age. But like as you've seen yourself with your in-body reading, it is doable. It's just a slightly longer process where diligent attention to dietary manipulations are very important on top of the training itself.
Yeah, I always find it a funny thing that people would say, all right, it's definitely a slower process, which is fine, but like putting on muscle is never a fast process. Like you're never going to put on a ton of muscle in a very short space of time and driving your calories really high to try and speed up that process. doesn't really speed up the process. You can only physiologically add so much muscle in so much time. But then if you drive your calories super high to try and speed up that process,
you're going to put on some fat.
Yeah, so you're going to extend the fat loss period at the other end to get back to your overarching body composition goal. So it's not no longer a slower process to get to the end goal. Because if you put on 5% of body fat with that additional 5 pound of muscle you've tried to gain, now you have to lose that 5 pound of fat instead of just taking the slower route about really trying to maintain the body fat percentage and while adding muscle. You'll probably end up being a very similar time frame.
Yeah.
That's why bulking, it's such a kind of like a thing of the past. Yeah, because bulking means you're eating in bulk. So there's no way the actual quality weight you're gaining is. There's no way the weight you're gaining is quality.
Yeah.
And then there's such a thing. I don't know if like there's been more recent study on this. I haven't looked into this in a long time, but years ago they used to say that the fatter you are, which was one of the reasons why they always suggest you get lean first before you try to drive a lot of muscle mass. But the fatter you are when you're trying to increase muscle mass, the higher the percentage of each pound you're gaining will be fat mass as opposed to muscle mass. And the leaner you are, then it's reversed. So, I mean, it makes sense to me to get lean first if you're fatter before driving more muscle.
Yeah. But if you think back to the bodybuilders too, I think that's where the term bulk came. And then they were able to do that. Basically, it wasn't a bulk. They just stopped dieting, gained a bunch of weight, and then they were assisted. So it was easier for them to lose the weight. But if you're a natural person, you shouldn't be bulking and then trying to get lean after.
Well, remember in 2001 when we went to have dinner with Nasser El-Sanbari in Toronto, and he was like 6 or 7 weeks out of the Olympia, and he was about 350 pounds, and he pounded 80 wings that night. Like he was nowhere. Like we were about. How is he going to make it to the Olympia? And he got on stage at the Olympia, and I think he finished 5 or 6 that year or something like that. It was mind-boggling.
Yeah, but for the bodybuilders that are enhanced, it doesn't actually matter that they're driving up their calories because they're no longer putting on muscle at the normal physiological limit, so they can use those calories way more readily than the rest of us.
What's the name of the Australian guy? How much did he?
Lee Priest.
Lee Priest. Man, he would gain like 100 pounds off season and look, a little obese basically. And then we just shed it all in like a few months before competition.
Yeah, but if you go back to a 20-year-old or 21-year-old Lee Priest, he looked phenomenal. Yeah. Go ahead.
I wonder what he looks like now when he's not competing.
Yeah, he still looks good.
Does he?
Yeah.
I think something else I frequently hear us always say is you have to earn it. And when it comes to driving hypertrophy and muscle gain, like you were saying, like when we're saying get lean first, we're talking about someone who is at like 30%, who's still, like what would you say percent wise for male and female? Would you then, if they were your clients, then switch the focus? Like how lean do you want them before then you're focusing on driving hypertrophy?
I mean, that's a guesstimation, and it also depends on the modality of fat measurement you're doing. But based on the in-body, personally, I would think a male would be like minimum 18%.
Yeah, I was thinking more 15, but
15. Female like at 22-ish.
Yeah, that would be
like that to me would kind of make sense. You're like lean enough.
Being lean enough is basically just being more metabolically healthy.
Exactly.
Goal. So
to be able to make the smaller manipulations with things.
Yeah, because you don't want to have to like start, like you said, like having big, like increasing your calories 800 calories. Even if you're metabolically healthy, if you increase by 800, you're going to put on a lot of fat.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And then generally we're going to drive carbs a little higher if we're trying to put on muscle. So you just want to be that little bit better. Insulin sensitivity and all that, just so your life's a little easier and not falling asleep after each meal.
Yeah.
I also think this is more like empirical than scientific in a sense, but I know that a lot of the nutrient timing stuff has been like not debunked, but it's been like
Studied more.
downplayed in recent years. But as a coach, though, and based on experience, I still think that in the long run, nutrient timing still has benefits in positively influence body composition changes in the long run. So I feel in the long run, if you're clever with nutrient timing, you can swing the pendulum towards more hypertrophy or more fat loss, depending on how you're doing it. It's just kind of hard sometimes to have really good studies on this phenomenon and have a true appreciation of what's really going on. It's because they're typically like factoring one element to the nutrition on a 8-week study.
Yep.
And when we're dealing with natural people, the gain in muscle mass, and there's also a huge difference in gain in cross-section area mass and gain in muscle mass, which is a weird thing to say, but depending on how the research studies the increase in mass, sometimes they use MRI technology where they're looking at the increase in cross-section area, and then sometimes they actually look at increase in muscle mass. But now I'm going in a rabbit hole here, but when they look at cross-section area, they're looking more at the medial increase in muscle mass, but the distal in the medial increase in cross-section area, but the distal increase is not as big. So it gets misleading. You could have like a 12% increase in muscle mass, but a 24% increase in cross-section area. So sometimes the reading might be like, oh, this protocol led to a significant increase in muscle mass, but they're talking about CSA, whereas another study, they're like, it was a minimal increase in muscle mass, but they were looking at the muscle mass value. So even that can actually affect.
You need to start putting pictures into when they report on studies so we can see what it looks like.
When you say nutrient timing stuff, are you talking specifically around the workouts or looking at the full day?
Well, workout, but full day as well. I mean, okay. So now, like a lot of studies says that the total protein intake daily is the most important thing, and I'm not denying this, but at the same time, let's say that your ultimate goal is to drive as much hypertrophy as you can. Instead of having, let's say you need to eat, let's say you need to eat 240 grams of protein a day, okay? Well, instead of eating 3 times 80 grams, it would be a little bit more beneficial to eat, let's say, 4 times 60 grams. Because now, like by default, you're kind of increasing your
muscle protein synthesis.
Your muscle protein synthesis stimulation. Yeah. So, it's hard to argue with that. I understand that some research might show there's minuscule difference, but again, if the difference is 3%, but times 2 years of training, well, that 3% compounds when it comes to muscle mass. So if you're a pure physique competitor, well, why not leverage that to its fullest? And I mean, there's a reason why physique athletes tend to eat slightly more meals. I'm not saying that you need to eat like Greg Kovacs used to eat 12 times a day. That's extreme.
But every 3-4 hours, I think, is what most people will agree with. If you can get
even
a protein
Donald Lehman kind of like
every
promotes that.
Because you're also counting the post-workout. Because for me, I remember when Steph first started training me and I started taking it really seriously. I got one of those 6-pack coolers. I had my freaking 6 meals a day and I did it. I got results, but I didn't enjoy the process of having to eat 6 times a day. Yeah. And now I just eat my 3 square meals, but I have my post-workout shake and I'm happy with that. I feel good. I get the results I want. And I think people default to, I'm going to eat like a bodybuilder or someone that competes and eat 6 times a day.
It's miserable.
And if you can't maintain it and you can't do it consistently, it's not going to ultimately help you drive those long-term results.
Yeah. But one thing people always miss or leave out of context is if your ultimate goal is hypertrophy, at some stage your calories can get pretty high.
Yeah.
Like I remember when I was up eating 4,000 calories a day, I think it took me 6 meals just so they weren't all stupidly big meals.
Yeah.
So I had to just had that many meals so I wasn't constantly just absolutely bloated, bloated, but just constantly full.
Yeah.
So so at some stage, if your calories get really high, you just need more meals to make your life slightly more enjoyable.
Well, but even like on a food load perspective, but even like because if you're eating 4,000 calories in 3 meals, it's 1,333 calories per meal.
Yeah.
So I mean, just the load and then if you have a lot of protein, let's say it's beef, it's leucine rich, so that's a high insulin response plus all the carbohydrates. So I mean, it's not ideal for most people. So you're better off having like smaller meals. And then I'm a huge fan of unprocessed, like clean food. But at the same time, when you're eating 4,000, if you need 4,000 calories to put on muscle, well, that's when processed food at one point becomes
as long
important.
as you get your basics, you get your healthy protein, your vegetables, the rest you can kind of like.
Yeah, like it took me probably took me 10 months to build up to 4,000 calories, but it was always with clean food, so it was a lot of food.
Yeah, and at least you said it took you 10 months.
People
look at it and to think they're going to freaking
go from
bump up their calories.
No, because I remember I started 2,800. I was putting on some size at 2,800. Once that slowed down, bumped it. 10 months later, it was 4,000. But the best part of it was I got a first breakfast and a second breakfast, and everyone loves breakfast.
I had a super interesting discussion like in 2019 with Anthony Castor, where like that guy, by the way, if you want to follow like a brainiac genius on like metabolism and like protein synthesis and nutrition in general, like follow this guy. But he was explaining to me, and I don't know the detail, like that's way beyond my scope of knowledge, but he was explaining to me that people who chronically undereat, they negatively affect their gut flora. And at one point, you need to have phases where you're increasing your food intake. And if you're increasing calories, you're actually changing your gut flora. And eventually that gut flora makes you more efficient at using these calories. So for people who seeking hypertrophy eventually, you also want to, like, because what you did is pretty smart by gradually increasing your calories. It means that at the same time, I mean, I know gut flora, like we still don't know much about it, but you're giving the time to your gut flora to readjust and make it more efficient at using these calories for its proper use. I'm talking outside of my scope of knowledge, but I thought it was an interesting side note how important this can actually affect the bigger picture.
But it makes sense because think of someone who's like obese and they eat, let's say, 3,500 calories, but they should, let's say, according to what they want to weigh, they should eat 2,000. They're not gaining weight at 3,500. They can maintain their weight. Like, so it's just interesting in terms of like when your set point gets set at a certain thing and you have to like play with, you gotta vary it just to see. Or I have also had clients who, like females who eat 1,200 calories a day and they don't lose weight. So it's just your body gets adapted to that, and I wonder if it has to do with the gut flora.
I mean, it could be, but and then even like protein, right? I know it was supposed to be a training thing, but even with protein, and this is just a food for thought for you guys. And I'm not saying I have an answer here, but it's just something that I think about all the time. And because I read research all the time, and what clicked in my head at one point, whenever they do protein requirement research for strength trainees, a lot of the protocols are very simplistic. And then you have two types of protocols. You have the protocols with very rigid parameters on a very specific low margin of error exercise, like a leg press or a leg extension, and it's like a 5 sets of 12 workout, blah, blah, blah. And then they measure, like they make sure you go to maximal voluntary contraction, and then they measure the outcome of increased muscle mass over the course of the 12-week study, for example. And then they say, okay, well, this amount of protein led to this amount of gain in muscle mass, but and lower protein did not, and more protein did not change. But the question I have often, and very often to these parameters, these protocols, it's like a controlled tempo. Okay, so we know that muscle damage on a 5 sets of leg extension of 12 reps, there's very low muscle damage. Okay, so the recovery curve will be very, very fast. So let's say that you're using a protocol like this to determine what's the threshold of protein needed to build muscle mass. And then it says that like 0.8 gram per pound of body weight is enough to build muscle mass. Now, my question is, for people who train, because they're trying to build a beast, like you have an athlete for a short 12-week off season and he needs to put on size and speed and blah, blah, blah. And they're training 4 times a week, upper, lower, with tempos and like some eccentric work and, 240 reps per session type of work with like long range of motion movement and blah, 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 blah. My question is, would it be fair to assume that these athletes might require more than the 0.8 that the scientific literature claims is enough to put on muscle? Maybe they need more. And if we look at very successful strength coaches in our field, a lot of them prescribe slightly more protein. And could it just be that because the style of training that we're doing requires more protein? So I'm just saying that sometimes it's okay to take a step back, look at the reality of things and adjust according to what you're doing. For example, I'm a huge fan of intra-workout essential amino acid supplementation. But technically speaking, if you're a very scientific-based type of person, you might be saying, but what's the point? Your total daily intake of protein is good enough. Why are you wasting amino acids on EAAs? But what if I tell you that when I consume EAAs intra-workout, you're diminishing the amount of soreness you're getting from training, you're speeding up the recovery curve, and on and on and on and on. Well, I'm above the minimum requirement, but so what? Maybe it's needed with these types of training modalities, but it's hard because when the average person looks at the literature, they simply look at, well, it showed that after strength training for 12 weeks, 0.8 gram per pound was sufficient. But what about the actual training output with the actual training program? So anyways.
Yeah.
Well, I think
but it's hard to get that much protein to begin with. So like, why not take that opportunity to really maximize your training and take some of that protein within your peri-workout and have those amino acids in your blood as you're training, like right after training, so that they're close to, the activity so that they can go where they need to go.
Yeah, and you're also fueling dopamine level intra-workouts. You're increasing neural drive. It's not only
muscle protein synthesis. We need amino acids for other processes while we're training. So I think I agree with you.
Yeah.
We definitely should.
I know we agree, but I just wanted to let the audience food for thought. Think about this sometimes.
Yeah, and it's not like you're ever really going to see a scientific protocol that it's really, really hard training, but they're seeing the minimum amount of protein needed for hypertrophy. That's not the way the scientific process is going to be done. It's going to be, this is technically sufficient volume and enough frequency for this muscle to grow per week. So that's box ticked on the training side. Let's look at the one variable that we're trying to change, because that's what the protein is. So they're not going to really drive the training side of things because that's not the variable they're looking at. So
yeah, and but like like Jose Antonio,
yep,
like from ISSN, I don't know what was the training protocol, to be honest, but he was talking about benefits even as high as 3 grams per pound.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying to consume this, but all I'm saying there was benefits up to 3 grams per pound. So I mean, it's such a, like sports nutrition is a super deep and interesting field, but I think that it's okay to experiment with it, and I think that everybody responds differently. Yeah. And I know that for me, and I was telling Porik like months ago, I'm like, I upped my dosage of EAAs intra-workout, and automatically within a week I had like a marked difference in my level of soreness. So sometimes it's like, even if science would be like, that man, you're wrong, but I don't care. I feel better. At the end of the day, I'm a coach. I'm not a scientist. So, but coming back to the training part of things, like, so again, we're like Alex and I knows because we're old, but we're in a the fitness world is this like interesting revolving door of like, stuff goes, stuff comes back. And then whenever it comes back, people think it's new, but it's the same old stuff with a different name that always. And now we've been through at least a cycle and a half since I started training. And so right now the trend is you want to, so let's talk about the body fat component of body composition. So now people are all about, well, do lower volume of strength training, do lower reps, just make sure that you maintain your strength and maintain your hypertrophy, and let the nutrition or your steady state zone 2 cardio do the work. Great. Will it work? Yes, of course. But at the end of the day, my bias is and will be sports performance. And there's one biomotor ability that people seem to completely disregard nowadays for some reason. It's almost like people find zero value in it, is strength endurance. But in my opinion, if your training year is well periodized or well thought out, why wouldn't you use sometimes phases of strength endurance to boost your ability to buffer lactate, increase mitochondrial function, increase the amount of capillaries feeding the tissue, increase your overall general conditioning, increase caloric expenditure in intra-workout. It just makes you a little bit more of a resilient beast when you're training. And I think that spending some time in the strength endurance world has some beneficial impact on body composition, especially if you increase your level of conditioning, which means that you're improving your rate of recovery, which means that when you get back to your heavy lifting, now you can actually cope with more work, with improved recovery, higher frequency, which means you have higher opportunities for anabolism. So you're improving or you're increasing your chance to put on more muscle at the same time. But people are shying away. Oh, don't waste your time doing strength endurance work in the weight room, blah, 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 wasting your time. But I don't think you're wasting your time. Do I think that it should be a year-round training modality? No, that would be an extreme waste of time. But it makes you a better overall athlete. It drives your conditioning level. You've done it. You've done a few phases of strength endurance, and it's beneficial.
So for listeners who may not know specifically, when you say strength endurance, what makes like a macro cycle a strength endurance or what? Meso?
I'm not saying a macro cycle.
But that's what I'm saying. So explain that.
Well, a strength endurance phase would be a mesocycle where your average rep is 13 and over. Okay, so with loads of, between 50 to 70%.
So your average rep, you're looking at the entire session is 13 and over?
Yeah, like even your A series would be.
Yeah. Your primary movement, you're doing 13 reps and up. So this would be strength endurance. You could argue that a fat loss specialization macro cycle where we're using time under tension as our main driver or training response, the entire macro would be a strength endurance macro because we're using strength endurance rep schemes, but we're also using high metabolic stress training methods like giant sets and trisets and stuff like that. That really is a strength endurance training response. It's just that the advantage of this, instead of doing like one set of 50, okay, which would be super non-productive because you're at 30% of 1 RM, well, you're doing a tri-set of, let's say, 3 exercises of 15 repetitions. So it's a similar amount of total reps, but a higher average load because you're changing motor unit pull every time you change an exercise. So you're getting a systemic training effect, but locally you're tapping into a wider pool of motor units at a higher average intensity. So you're having a better training response. So in that sense, this could be considered a strength endurance macro cycle.
And then everyone's thinking like, all our students, anything above 8 is strength endurance. No. They like to...
Well, so many like to fool themselves in thinking they're like the next coming of fast twitch fibers, but they're just poorly conditioned or inefficient at higher reps. But it's trainable. But it is true that some people, like the higher your training age, the lower the amount of reps you will be able to do for any given intensity. That's just a fact of training. So yes, for some people, going above 8 reps would be like doing 13 reps and up.
But they can still do. Like you can
We're not
still
talking
do
about
13
emotionally.
yeah, exactly.
So you're saying in terms of to use strength endurance, but if we open up back into body composition training, I know we look at it as we have fat loss specialization phases. So that's where we utilize methods to drive fat loss changes.
Well, to bias body composition changes towards more fat loss. Because we're challenging work capacity. We're trying to improve work capacity. We're trying to tap into the glycolytic energy system, so making you more efficient at using fuel properly to generate ATP to create more output, and on and on and on and on. And then, obviously, assuming that the nutrition is good, then you should bias more fat loss changes simply because you're building a more efficient machine for fuel oxidation. So that's the thing. Yeah, yes, the calorie is important. That's not what I'm saying. But if we're making you more efficient, then we're just like leveraging the fat loss process to a greater extent.
I know we were talking about it because I know in our fat loss specialization, so fat loss program design course we had online, we're changing that name from fat loss program design to fat loss specialization course. But in terms of those were using those methods you're talking about. I know we talked about it with me for fun at the start of the year, instead of doing like a full macro, to just do it in like a 6 weeks just to see what I could accomplish with doing it. And I know when we talk about nutrition for those types of phases, we're not talking about a deficit. And again, going back to what everyone always assumes, okay, it's a fat loss phase. I need a caloric deficit. But yes, you will, but it's the training that's driving you to be in a deficit.
Yeah. I mean, you can get a deficit from either your training or from your nutrition. So it's or both if you really want to push it. But like if you're doing that, then it's definitely, you can't do it for a long period of time.
Well, you can do both when the training volume is low.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you're not creating a caloric deficit with the training.
Well, I mean, it won't be huge, but it's still more than zero training.
Yeah, no, for sure.
When we're using the fat loss specialization phase, that we're really using the training to drive the calorie deficit way more so than the diet.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, so you're actually eating more. I mean, you can. Of course, it depends on the person, but you can. But typically, if you want to fuel that type of training, you'll actually be either at maintenance or actually in a surplus.
On a intake perspective.
Yeah.
But that's the other thing too. That's why we also teach in the course that these fat loss specialization / strength endurance dominant training modalities work better with the intermediate to advanced trainee, because the problem is the full-blown novice doesn't have the neural apparatus to make that type of training effective enough to create a big enough metabolic disturbance to create a big enough caloric deficit. So that's why we use a different approach with these people.
I remember when I started doing GBCs with my female clients, it was always like, hard to get them to push or to sweat or whatever. And I'm like, man, I wonder what's wrong with my programs. Is it me? And then I had like a younger male athlete come in, do the same type of workout, and he was like thrown up within the second set. So I'm like, okay, it's not me. But that just goes to show you have to put in the energy to actually get the benefit from it. Because if you're using like a quarter of your motor units, then you're not going to get the energy output that you need to lose weight.
Yeah, and it's not that they're not putting the effort in. It's just they don't have the ability to recruit enough motor units. Yeah. So they just need to have more training experience and better ability to recruit motor units. So pretty much be able to, they have to get strong before they can get the real benefits of that side of training. Yeah.
But I'm bringing back the fact that I have this performance bias in my approach to training and how I view training in general. And another good example, and what's really popular now are the steps, right? The 10,000 steps that people talk about. Now we know it's more like 8,000, but then like recently it's 7,000. It sort of keeps decreasing, whatever. But of course, steps are great. And steps really allow you to have more total daily energy expenditure. It's great. But the problem with the steps is it doesn't build anything. So all I'm saying sometimes is, well, have 2 steps, great. But why not train the aerobic system to actually increase your VO2 max? Now, if you increase your VO2 max through real aerobic training, now your ability to use oxygen to oxidize nutrients is much greater. So by default, doing nothing on a day-to-day later on, you're better equipped to lose more fat. So I'm not saying to not walk, but to me, it's a funny thing to be like, you don't need to do any type of aerobic work or to improve your VO2 max. Just focus on the walks and that'll get you there. And I understand that this is for the jump up and the person who has a hard time getting off the couch. And I get it. It's way less
But I think they're saying to do both. They're saying you should walk and you should do...
That's not what most people talk about. Like even some pretty popular physique celebrities actually promote walking instead of cardio because cardio fatigues you, and because you're fatigued from cardio, you're not going to walk as much. And in the end, you'll burn more calories doing your walk and it's not as intensive. That's cool when you're only looking at burning calories. But if I want to build a machine, I want them to train the aerobic system. Yeah.
And then some people were like, I know the overarching scientific number was like 10,000 down to 8,000, but some people were pushing that number just 15, 20,000 just to try and manipulate more energy output from their clients like on a consistent basis. But the time it takes to do that level of steps when you could have just done you probably actually end up getting more total output from doing your normal amount of steps and then your cardio on top of it. It's crazy to think.
Yeah, for me to get like 10,000 steps, it takes me at least an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes.
Because you're my step, and you cover about 800 meters.
Funny stuff.
Going back to training.
But the good thing about with steps is that it just doesn't. It is for the average
Yeah, to me, it's on a health perspective.
It's a health
I still think people
because it doesn't increase your hunger. Like some people, if they do hit, like it'll increase their hunger. It'll increase your cortisol.
Just follow your diet and suck it up.
Some people don't have an iron mind like you.
Okay, but are we? But are we talking about like helping grandma, or are we talking about?
No, but that's what a lot of trainers do.
Yeah.
Going back to training. So the fat loss specialization phases, and just so this is body composition in general. So then biasing hypertrophy. So I know we just did a whole podcast on hypertrophy training. And then we talked about how for us, yes, we do use splits in the hypertrophy specialization phases. But in general, we still believe that we look at training as the upper days, the lower days, even if we're in like a hypertrophy phase.
Yeah, of course. Like I believe that, I mean, we talk about it all the time. I believe that one of the side effect of strength training is increase in muscle mass. So it doesn't need to be this like grandiose, like training program to trigger a response in muscle mass. The most people will do really well with an upper lower. They're going to recover well enough. They're going to put on some muscle. I think that's the go-to with most people. It's just that we know, because we've been doing it for 25 years, that in certain situations, if you truly want to really bias hypertrophy to its maximum, to have phases where you're using splits to allow you to work at higher volume loads will allow you to leverage hypertrophy to a greater extent, because why? You've trained the person to be better equipped to gain muscle because their work capacity is greater and their ability to recover is greater and their ability to store nutrient is improved. So now when you go back to your phase of heavier lifting on the upper lower split, then you can generate more output and work with that split, because now you're better equipped because you've spent time conditioning yourself to use your nutrients better.
Like, I know this is a very, very just vague number, but even if someone's ultimate goal was just hypertrophy, I would still be saying 75% of their year will be very, very standard strength training.
Yeah.
Just very, very standard. And then if they want to boost it, 25% can be dedicated to like very specialized hypertrophy methods. But with standard strength training, that you're just working on getting stronger week to week, you're going to put on size. If you want to emphasize a body part, you can train slightly more frequently or with slightly more sets per week. Doesn't even have to be like adding frequency is definitely a good variable to play with. So if you want to grow your arms, you could add in arms on your both upper body days. One way, like it's no matter what, they're going to get trained with the compound movements, but isolating them is going to further drive that stimulus. You can do the same for your delts, do the same for your quads. Like we can play about with those variables in a very standardized strength training model without ever having to get into the fancier stuff.
Yeah, completely agree, because the crazy stuff can only work for a short period of time. That's why it's a special consideration type of macro cycle. So it's all about the proper application and timing of these methods. So it's periodization, right? So periodizing properly allows you to drive more response, but that type of training is so draining that there's no way you can continuously do that style and that approach to training, especially not if you're natural.
And I think a lot of people do end up driving themselves into the ground because they try to do that much work, and they do get beat up in the gym more because they view training and periodization of training very narrow-mindedly, so they don't see the bigger picture of like, we still just want to strength train, and you want your people to be in the gym always gaining strength and always increasing their ability to lift more so that they get stronger, and then the other implementations of specialty methods then drive even greater results.
Yeah. But go ahead.
Because of most people who train consistently, they're often just lean and jacked. Like they don't necessarily, a lot of those people don't do like specializations and stuff. Like if you just consistently train year after year, you'll get, well, as long as your nutrition's good too. But, you don't have to do specializations all the time.
Yeah.
If you expect to train 2 days a week and be jacked, you maybe have to reevaluate. You can start, like, once people get to 3 times a week, they can definitely start to see notable results, but 2 times a week is a struggle. It's a struggle. Yeah. You're really gonna, once after the first 6 months of training, it's gonna slow down dramatically.
I was reading a recent study where they were showing that, I think that was 2022, they were showing that once you're advanced, your gain in strength, I'm talking strength here, but your gain in strength was drastically higher at 4+ training sessions per week with a ceiling at 6. So there is something to be said about training frequency. And once you reach a certain level, of course, if you've never trained, any stimulus will help you. But eventually you need that frequency to drive the training response.
Yeah, and then building off that, if you are going to push your training frequency to 6 times a week, you really have to start then being careful with how much volume and how close to failure you're bringing everything in those sessions, because that's a lot of frequency to recover from.
Yeah, the 6 times a week model with natural trainees only works with a model where you have heavy, medium, light days.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to blow up and get a point of diminishing return way too quick.
Yeah, or it's like a super compensation phase that you're going to try.
Yeah, like overreaching.
Exactly, yeah. You're going to drive it for 2, max 3 weeks, and then step away, like properly away, go on vacation and grow because you're doing nothing. But all of these things, they're great, but it really is only good if you can recover from it.
Yeah.
But my problem, and I keep talking about this recently, but it's like people are so scared now to train too much that they never build the ability or the machinery to be able to recover quicker, to drive more work. So as soon as they try any type of model that's a little bit more intensive, then they crash and burn real quick because they never spend the time building that base. I'm telling you, like it's frustrating because the performance component of training kind of disappeared. Like it disappeared in terms of training models, disappeared in terms of exercise selection, all for greater hypertrophy. But it's ironic to me because you're actually limiting your long-term potential for hypertrophy because you never get to the point where you can train the brain to be really effective at recruiting motor units, to be really strong, to be really big.
But like, and still the case now, the biggest and strongest people you'll find generally do the most work. They just it's not the people who are overly obsessed of what is the amount of volume I should be doing. It's the people that probably do too much and they figure out that they can recover for it by eating a bit more or sleeping a bit more. Like they do too much and they adjust to that. It's not the ones that do too little and say, "Oh, but I'm recovering really well." No, what the fuck are you recovering from? You didn't train.
What are you trying to do?
Then we live in a world nowadays where technology with supplements is so great that you have so many ways to bolster like higher recovery that like use it. Like if you can use it.
Yeah, and recovery modalities have expanded dramatically in the last like few years.
Yeah, I mean, like we laugh about this sometimes, but needing like a massage and cold plunge and like a hyperbaric chamber for 2 times a week, 37-minute training, to me it's hilarious. But if you need it, you need it. Yeah.
I think what it goes back to for us personally when it comes to body composition training is just everyone still needs to spend the time strength training and getting strong. And I'm not saying like strong, like powerlifting strong or having the ability to just stronger than what you currently are. We're not saying you have to squat 2 times body weight, because I know that you guys say that we set that as a goal, as like an athletic performance goal. But we have a lot of listeners that still want to drive performance and get stronger. But what that means for you is just on a day-to-day, week-to-week meso, macro to macro, you're personally getting stronger in your weights. And then that's what drives your results.
Yeah, like I'm super pragmatic with that stuff. Like I see strength training almost like as a mathematical equation for better or worse. But to me, if you increase your, like if you're able to increase your estimated 1RM over time, or you're able to increase the amount of load you're using for any given reps over time, you know you're on the right path. Yep. You know you're gaining muscle. You know you're gaining strength. So you know that the side effect from your training are positive. So tracking your strength, to me, it's like the essence of the weight room.
It's like people who, my dad, I'll call him out on this, who like per exercise, he always just uses one weight. He's like, oh, for this, I do 15 pounds. And it's not a lot of weight either. And it's like, well, you're never, and then, I mean, he manipulates his, like, he can lose weight if he tries to, but it's always with nutrition because he always trains. But he's been doing the same thing, like in the basement for, I don't know.
Well, he has one pair of 15-pound dumbbells,
exactly.
And he does lunge, curl, tricep extension, lateral raise, squats with those 15-pound dumbbells. It doesn't matter what it is.
Gosh.
Yeah, it's funny. Back in, not my gym in Ireland, the gym I trained in before I opened my gym, there was a guy that was there 4 times a week, every week, no matter, like, if Christmas fell on a Thursday, he was there on the Thursday because that's what he did. Wrote every set down, wrote every rep down, wrote every weight down, but did the exact same exercise with the exact same weight, with the exact same reps for years on end. But wrote it down religiously. It's like, all right.
Is it like a memento thing?
I don't know. It was impressive.
Did you ever ask to see it? You're like, oh, show me your progress.
I would have been about 18 or 19 at this time, so no.
If you're looking at the N writing progress, that was the only positive.
That's funny. But if we look at like body composition, if we like you compare the fat loss training to the hypertrophy training. No, but even with you know what I'm going to say.
Oh, yeah.
But even with us, it's like it's very volume based, right? Except for fat loss is more full body versus hypertrophy. Then we're doing splits. So this is the story where years ago I went to a fat loss camp.
Boot camp.
With a boot camp with Charles Poliquin. And went through all these training sessions. We were training like 2 or 3 times a day. And it was really hard, whatever. And then Steph goes to a hypertrophy.
Like 6 months later.
Like 6 months later. So then, we're talking, we're looking at the workouts and stuff. They were the exact same workouts.
Everything was the same.
But I remember talking to Charles about it. I'm like, dude, it's like the same thing. And he was like, yeah, but it's the same. Like, you're basically trying to lose fat and gain muscle. And I'm like, true.
So it could have, like, it was a body composition.
Yeah, it was
camp.
body
they
composition.
Just changed the name of it.
Exactly. And then changed the splits, basically. That's all it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
it was giant set phase 1, Hepburn method phase 2, tricep phase 3.
6, 12, 25.
Oh, you gotta love the Hepburn method in a fat loss phase.
Yeah. Fat loss
8 by 1 and then 5 by 5.
Okay. 8 by 1, 5 by 5 with like basically the same exercise. You could change the grip a little bit on Scott curl and dips for arms day for fat loss. And
8 by 1 on Scott curl. It's wild.
Yeah, Snap City.
That was a very open-ended discussion on body composition. I will say that it is Black Friday week, so Black Friday to Cyber Monday, trainkilo.com. I wanted to bring this up because Kilo started in 2016. So we started, Alex, Steph, and I started as just a gym. We started group training. So we started as a gym. Then a couple months in, we realized we were going to do education. So then we added education. Then we added supplements. Then we added PDF training programs. And so as a company, we've grown dramatically. And as me on the back end, I've always had to like figure it out as we've been going. So we had a lot of different platforms, websites, because we were doing so many things. Like we needed a different website for our group training than what we were doing in our education. So finally, now we are now one website.
We are one.
We are one website with everything we do, trainkilo.com, online coaching, online courses, in-person courses, resources, personalized programming, PDF programs.
The gear.
Yeah, T-shirts, everything. Online. On trainkilo.com.
One website.
Yeah. No, there's still two because of our online education portal. You just have to remember to log in for your online courses, but it is linked on trainkilo.com. And we do have some super cool t-shirts that we're excited about for Black Friday. So check them out. They're live on the site now. Hopefully. Hopefully by the time this comes out, I've picked up the t-shirts from the t-shirt guy. But we appreciate your support. Grab everything that you want, resources, programs. Grab it all now. And just so everyone knows, the 12-week training programs that are on the site right now will one day no longer be on the site. They will magically disappear. So if you want them, now. So, trainkilo.com, subscribe, like, give us a share. Thanks for tuning in, fam. See you next week.
Happy Thanksgiving.